Good evening, and welcome to the Way Out Show. I'm your host, Dane McCarthy, broadcasting to you from FEMA Region 5, deep in the bowels of the United Police State of Amnesia. Today is January 10th, 2017. It's our first 2017 show. And what an amazing world we live in. 2017 looks to be shaping up to a very interesting year. Now, we'll find out whether Trump actually will become president or not, or if some catastrophic false flag attack, for instance, ends democracy as we know it and is replaced by martial law, police state, with perhaps Obama running it or something like that. I doubt if that will happen, but who knows? In the world we live in, so much is possible. One thing we do know, of course, is that there are efforts, very powerful forces at work trying to do whatever they can to run the Trump train off the rails. And one of the major things is that the elections have now been federalized. The Department of Homeland Security will, if this executive order stands, and it probably won't under Trump administration, who knows? Who knows what Trump will do? But up till now, the states have had control of the electoral process. Now it is the federal government has essentially illegally taken over by decree. This just happened, and they will be in charge. They will be monitoring, and this is a huge blow against state rights. This is fundamental, a fundamental shift toward the increased power of the federal government. And we have to remember that the United States of America is a collection of states, of sovereign states that have a pact called the Constitution to work together and be coordinated with a federal government with very limited powers. Well, as typically happens in governments, the centralized power tends to accumulate at the top because that's what people with power do. They want to accumulate more power. So, fortunately, Trump knows this, and he will probably make sure that these efforts are sort of flushed, and they will be able to continue on as before. You know, a lot of people say, well, you know, change is inevitable, progress is inevitable, and why would you want to turn back progress? Well, let's think about it this way. In Germany, in the 1930s, there was a democratic republic called the Weimar Republic. Well, then it was taken over by the Nazis. They got rid of the republic, the democratic processes in Germany, and installed fascism. Now, after the end of the war, what does Germany have? Germany has a representative democratic republic. Well, some people, by the logic that progress, you don't always want to keep moving forward, then how is that moving forward in Germany when you return to a democracy? Isn't that going backwards also? So this is an extreme example. But so therefore the idea of that you always have to go forward and you never go backwards is a fallacy, and it absolutely makes no sense. And it's really not going backward. What it is it's the wrong metaphor. It's not a matter of going forward or backward. It's a matter of staying on the right path and straying off the right path to the wrong path. Just like if you were driving somewhere and you took the wrong road that led you in the wrong direction, you might very well have to turn around and go back on that road to the place where you went off the main road in the right direction and then start and then you can't just keep going forward, and just because it would be wrong to turn around and go backwards. So the whole idea is just completely nonsensical. So I guess the big situation we're looking at here in the world right now is where will Trump take us? Or that is, if he even is sworn in. Will he bring about more prosperity? Will he destroy the country? Will he bring it into a situation where there is no hope for America, that America becomes a third world country that's a fascist dictatorship? We have to see how things are going so far, and we can look at some of the developments that have taken place and sort of gauge the direction that the country is going. And one thing we've seen is that Trump does make deals. He's already made several deals, even though he's only the president-elect, with various companies, and he's focusing on the car companies. Ford, Chrysler, now GM. And the GM is interesting because he tweeted that GM was making Chevy Cruze cars in Mexico and selling it without any tariff in the United States. Well, GM tweeted a rebuttal, and the rebuttal said, that's a lie. We do make Chevy Cruzes, and we make them in Lordstown, Ohio. Well, somebody else, a guy named Mick Nickermeyer, who writes professionally, I guess, about the automobile industry, did a little bit of research, and he found that the Chevy Cruzes are indeed made in Mexico and sold in the United States. Whereas they could be made in the United States and sold in the United States. But they're made with much cheaper labor in Mexico than they would be in the United States. So Trump's idea is, and this is what he's done with Ford and Chrysler, is if you move your plant out of the United States into Mexico and make cars with Mexican labor that's a lot cheaper, and then send them back to the United States to sell, you're going to have to pay a tariff for that, which makes perfect sense. This protects American workers. This protects American jobs. This protects the American economy. Well, concerning the Chevy Cruzes, they were made in Lordstown. That's apparently not true. They're not made in Lordstown. In fact, this guy did some research on cars, Chevy Cruzes in car lots in Lordstown, and they're even made in Mexico. So apparently the mainstream media completely swallowed, without doing any research or any homework, that the GM tweet was genuine and that they weren't lying, and broadcast it in media, mainstream media, all over the place, all these different outlets, media outlets, and now they have egg in their face because they didn't do their homework. They claimed that Trump didn't do his homework, that he's incompetent, that he shouldn't be allowed to be president, but it turned out that GM was lying. And then it turns out GM lies a lot. They try to get away with lies a lot. They try to get by with things. And don't ever forget, GM almost went under in the big crash of 2008. And it was up to the American taxpayer to bail them out. They took a big bailout. Ford didn't, but GM did. So what kind of company are we dealing with? And a lot of the comments dealt with the fact that a lot of Americans don't even want to buy GM cars anyway, because they're not very good cars. So you have a situation in which there are a lot of people who want to do anything that they can to discredit the gains that Trump has made already to prove to the American people that he is capable of following through and coming through for America and the American people. But on the same subject of Trump, I have a short clip. It's approximately 11 minutes. It was from InfoWars, and it's an interview with Roger Stone. Now, Roger Stone is kind of a controversial guy, but he knows a lot, and he's an insider. He's a Trump insider. He's a conservative. But he has a lot of really good information. And so this is a short, lively excerpt from an interview that InfoWars did with Roger Stone. So let's roll that clip, and then I'll go back and we'll continue on with the show.
We are live in the second hour of this Friday edition of the Alex Jones Show. Alex will be popping in with an update, God willing, next hour. But for the moment, we turn to someone who will be familiar to all of you out there. He is political consultant and strategist, Roger Stone. Roger, welcome back.
Paul, great to be here.
Now, I want to talk about, again, this Russian hysteria. We see it every single day. We've got this NBC News leak. The intel was supposedly leaked to them. Again, echo chamber of dodgy, evidence-free intelligence just bouncing back and forth between anonymous sources and the mainstream media. Every single time we get this, every single time they fail to present actual evidence. Roger, isn't it amazing that the Obama administration has waged this 8-year war on leakers and whistleblowers, you know, has demonized people like Julian Assange and WikiLeaks for leaking intelligence, and now they're leaking intelligence to the mainstream media?
Now, look, the entire thing is a farce. The U.S. Senate Armed Services Committee hearing yesterday, run by establishment stooge John McCain, was laughable. McCain admits that all of their information is based on assessments by the 17 intelligence agencies, all of them politically controlled by Barack Obama. No Republican member of the House or Senate Intelligence Committee, people who are fully qualified to see classified documents, have seen any proof. What we have are the claims of people like CIA Director John Brennan, a Wahhabist who is most likely a Saudi mole, a man who refused to utilize the Bible when he took the oath of CIA director, or Mike Mullins, a discredited former director who cleaned up the Clintons' paper trail on Benghazi. These are the people telling us we've been hacked by the Russians. They have produced no proof whatsoever, but endless hysteria and claims, none of which are yet proven by anyone.
Let me read to you what Chris Steyerwalt of Fox News said. This is really obvious what they're trying to go with here. After James Clapper's testimony, who of course lied under oath, let's not forget that, he said, quote, "It's clear the nation's spies are not going to let Trump and co. off the hook here. Their competency, integrity, and patriotism have been called into question, and they're not going to let the matter be tabled." So, Roger, they're trying to frame it as any question whatsoever, any demand for evidence by Trump or by any Trump supporters is evidence that they're unpatriotic. How basic a narrative is that?
Well, it's a reflection of the entire narrative from the beginning. Paul, you see, this is the new McCarthyism. When I opposed thermonuclear war with the Russians over Syria, the Clintonistas say I'm a traitor to my country, a non-patriotic American supporting the agenda of a foreign power. I grew up in the anti-communist movement. I hated the Russian system then. I hate the Russian system now. But the idea that if you don't support the neocons' rush to war over Syria, that you're a traitor to your country, it's insulting. Hillary Clinton tried it on Donald Trump, and the voters didn't buy it.
I mean, it's amazing that Democrats are doing this now after, for decades, the left, flung that allegation at the right. Oh, if you criticize anyone, you're a communist. Same with the war on terror under Bush. The left were incensed that they would be charged with being in league with the terrorists. George Bush gave the famous speech, "You're either with us or you're with the terrorists." That absolutely incensed the left, and rightly so at the time. I supported them. But now if anyone questions this intelligence, they're with the Russians. You had Tucker Carlson interviewing the Democratic congressman who saw the intelligence, on his Fox News show. And he said, why don't you go and get a show on RT? Again, couldn't look in the camera, couldn't say definitively that he'd seen any evidence that the Russians had hacked John Podesta's emails. It's absolutely insane that they're still pushing this narrative. Then you have Lindsey Graham. This is somebody who, during this hearing yesterday, literally sounded like Kim Jong-il from 10 years ago, calling on Donald Trump to, quote, throw rocks at Russia. I mean, Roger, at what point does his rhetoric itself represent a national security threat, given how unhinged Lindsey Graham sounds right now?
Look, Lindsey Graham is like the mini-me for Senator John McCain. He is a war at any costs fellow whose general foreign policy is send troops and let's find out what this is about later. He has been a consistent drumbeater for numerous foreign adventures that have cost both American millions and lives. And he's a camp boy follower for Senator John McCain. These people are smarting over their defeat by Donald Trump. McCain had a great big nothing burger. I listened to his hearings. He has briefings from the CIA. He has assessments. But no one has seen proof of Russian hacking. Indeed, we are told by Craig Murray, the UK veteran diplomat, that human intelligence, that he was involved in the passage of the Democratic National Committee leaks to WikiLeaks, which were not hacked material, but most likely purloined, for which I believe Seth Rich took 4 in the back, in all honesty. So it is the entire narrative is an extraordinary one.
And again, I mentioned a poll earlier that I think it was an NBC journalist was running. Who do you trust more, the US intel community and WikiLeaks? Of course, they're trying to set it up as an adversarial thing, Trump versus the intel community. We know it's not that.
But shall we just look at this from a historical point of view? They lied about the Kennedy assassination. They lied about Vietnam. They lied about Benghazi. They lied about the excesses in South America in the 70s. They were brought to heel by President Jimmy Carter, but the many CIA veterans that he fired had their revenge when they returned under Ronald Reagan. It's a rogue agency. Why would we believe anything that they say? They have an agenda quite different than that of the American people.
It's not a great track record, is it, to be honest? One thing, though, that cropped up, again, with of course, we had the accusations that the emails were passed to WikiLeaks by Russia, no evidence whatsoever. Assange denied it again in the Sean Hannity interview. He also mentioned, Sean Hannity asked him about you, whether you had met with him. Let's clear that up right now. Now, you say you haven't met with them. Let's clear that up.
I have never on any occasion claimed that I had met with him. I had never claimed that we had directly communicated, spoken on the phone, on the net, or otherwise. I simply said that we had a mutual friend, someone that was a friend of mine that I had a high regard for, and someone who he had a high regard for. This person is a libertarian, a free thinker. He's quite a chap. He told me several things that Assange had told him, such as Assange and WikiLeaks had unspecified political dynamite. That says nothing of John Podesta or Russian money laundering or the Clinton Foundation, simply that the information was politically devastating. The idea that I knew in advance the subject matter or the timing of anything WikiLeaks and Julian Assange chose to do is a lie. But it's a recycled refrain of the left who want to make the WikiLeaks disclosures the product of Russian activities, which they are not, and which Assange himself has said repeatedly they were not.
And they've lied repeatedly about Assange as well. We had CNN insinuating that he was a paedophile. They had to withdraw that after WikiLeaks threatened legal action. We had The Guardian.
This is a classic CIA disinformation dodge, Paul. As you know, they plant him with some girl who he meets presumably in a pub, and she's in a randy mood, and they have a good time, and then she turns out to be an asset. They're charging him with a crime. This is a setup. This is so classic British intelligence. It's an absurdity. Assange does not work for any nation state. He's not particularly fond of the Russians. I don't think he particularly likes the United States or China either, on the basis of many abuses that he knows about. But in my view, he is a patriot, not a stooge for Vladimir Putin.
And he's not particularly a fan of Donald Trump either. That's what we have to remember. Assange was bashed by the right, by the likes of Fox News for years and years when he kept releasing the Iraq footage, for example, back in 2010. The Guardian lied about him. They took an interview he did with, I think it was an Italian newspaper, and tried to frame it as if he was directly supporting Trump and being a cheerleader for Trump. Complete nonsense. They took a complete mistranslation of the interview. Again, had to retract the article. They get caught over and over again.
In all honesty, Paul, I'm actually quite confident that if Assange had had negative material from the email files of Donald Trump, he'd have published it. Trump, as you know, quite famously does not use email. So would there be very little to find? But it was the Clintons who were in government for 30 years, and that's why their information is important.
Okay, so I thought that was kind of a lively and interesting little discussion with Roger Stone there. I don't know what's up with that bowler hat, but oh well. You know, he's kind of an unusual looking guy. Anyway, I thought it was interesting, the information about what's going on. He is an insider. He talks with a lot of people who are in the Trump administration. He's written books, and so you know, this is just the way that the world is turning right now, and we have to try to keep abreast of it as much as we can, because you never know what could happen if you don't know what's going on. It's possible that you may fall into a hole that you didn't see coming because you never had your eyes open to look and see the hole, so you fall into a hole. And that's the whole purpose of providing information that is from another perspective. For those people who only watch NBC or ABC or CBS or MSNBC or Fox News, the alternative channels, and this is, for instance, InfoWars. The clip is from InfoWars. It gives you a different perspective, and it's sort of a collection of news stories on a wide variety of topics, and you not only look at it from the true liberal perspective, but from the libertarian perspective, from the conservative perspective. And it seems the way the world is going is that it is possible for the people who are on the right side, who are doing the moral thing, to change. Sometimes what is moral and what is right, one view of the world, turns out no longer to be right. Maybe it was right for a while, but then gradually over years and decades, it changes and it becomes no longer so right. And that's okay. It's okay to change like that and see that things aren't the way we expected it to be our whole lives. Americans are living a long time, some of them, and they're allowed to change. If you were born a Democrat or born a Republican, it doesn't mean you have to be with that party until you die, because the party is only a party. It's not a set of moral values necessarily. In the past, the Republicans have done a lot of really nasty, dirty things, been very warlike. In the past, the Democrats at other times have done the same. They have got us involved in wars as well. So why would anyone have absolute loyalty to their particular party? And the problem, I think, is that they identify their personality or their soul or their heart or their humanity with that particular party. That's the easy way to go. And it's like becomes a religion. Oh, I'm a Catholic. Oh, I'm a Protestant. Oh, I'm an Episcopalian. Oh, I'm Jewish. Oh, I'm Muslim. And we have to remember, those are religions. A person who is a Muslim was not a Muslim when they were born. It's not who they are. It's a religion. It's a label that they've placed on themselves. And it doesn't necessarily mean that's who you are. What we all are human beings. And that makes us all the same, because everyone is a human being. So when someone says to me that they're Jewish, and I say, well, if you were to turn away from Judaism, would you still be Jewish? And they would say yes. They would still be Jewish because they were born Jewish. I mean, I asked them, is that what you are? Is Jewish what you are, or is that your religion? And they would say, no, it's what I am. It's what I was born. And so in other words, the Jewish people, some of them, consider themselves to be born, it's a race. It's a racial characteristic. It's almost like a species. But we know this is not true. Because if you scientifically look at the makeup of a person of these different religions, like Jewish, Muslim, Christian, Hindu, it's all the same. Physically, they're the same. So this is completely a mental mindset that people have. And people forget this. And I think that the government could go a long way to resolving issues of, they call it race, by promoting that we are all human beings and we're all the same, rather than slicing and dicing everybody into groups, into small groups. White people, brown people, black people, yellow people. This is what the government does. Ordinary people don't do this usually. They're influenced by propaganda, which is a lie. And nowadays, propaganda is called fake news. But who is the biggest purveyor of propaganda historically? Governments. Governments. Disinformation. CIA. The CIA propagates so much disinformation, that is what they do. The CIA has caused a lot of turmoil in the world since it was created at the end of World War II. It has caused nothing but havoc throughout the world. And again, it's dividing people up. You know, communists, capitalists. Governments and we're seeing this in the U.S. government a lot, and in other governments. Conservatives, liberals, libertarians, any possible way that governments can divide up people, that's what they do. By pointing out that people are different and causing people to identify with a particular belief system or political view or skin color. In the arts world, in theater, there has been a policy for a while, which is basically colorblind, in which you don't look at people's skin color when you cast them in plays. So a Shakespeare play might have several people, characters in that play who are Asian or black or not white. Now we know that it's pretty unlikely that when Shakespeare wrote those plays that he was thinking of casting somebody like Henry V as a black person. Now he did write roles for Jewish people. He did write roles for black people. I'm thinking of Othello the Moor. He was black. So he did, when he wanted to have a black person, he said, this is a black person playing this role. And the whole play is about, how the black person fit in or didn't fit in Othello. It's a tragedy. And it's a great classic piece of theater. But nowadays, the idea is don't concentrate on that and just cast people by who seems to fit the role, who is a good fit, without looking at skin color. I think the governments could do this too. They could just ignore all that completely, and they could influence people. And you might say, well, they couldn't influence people. It comes from, these views come from people, ignorant people. Well, sure, but governments do influence people. We know governments influence people because they constantly are influencing people. We're all being influenced by government all the time. And just unbelievable things, both for good and for bad, have come as a result of efforts made by government. Before World War I, for instance, Americans didn't want to get involved in World War I. It had been just chewing up young men in Europe for years, and Americans were still neutral. And then there was this event in which there was an ocean liner blown that was destroyed and sank by a German U-boat, and the propaganda machine went into full force in the government and got people fired up and got young men volunteering to go to war in Europe, in the trenches, in droves. Same thing happened before World War II after Pearl Harbor. Same thing happened after 9/11, in which, after 9/11, suddenly it was war. We're going to war. And where are we going to war? Well, we'll have to figure out where we're going to war. I know, let's go to Afghanistan to war, because they hosted Al-Qaeda. They had Osama bin Laden in a cave. They let him be in a cave in Afghanistan. And he directed 9/11 from that cave. And he presumably had his dialysis machine with him in that cave. And so all we have to do is find that cave and kill all those Al-Qaeda people. And then, well, you'd think, okay, we'll go there and we'll get those people. But then, wait a minute, why we're still there? Here it is, 2016, we're still in Afghanistan. There's no reason why we're in Afghanistan. In Iraq, there was even less of a reason. It turned out to be a complete lie that they made up. I think people lied actually about Afghanistan too. One of the major reasons the American government got into Afghanistan was because the Taliban suppressed the opium crop. So that meant all the people who were making billions of dollars in profits from the sale of heroin were suddenly out of business. The Taliban put them out of business. If you look at a graph chart of the sale of production of opium in Afghanistan, it just goes right down. And the lowest point is 2001. It goes down, 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 2001, then the invasion, boom, up, 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 all the way back up. We're, I don't know how many times much more opium, heroin, is coming out of Afghanistan than happened in 2001. A lot. And now we're seeing a tremendous, huge, unbelievably bad heroin epidemic. And people say, well, it's from the oxycodone. They had the pill mills. They got people hooked. Even people who just come in with a broken foot or something, and then they get a prescription to OxyContin or oxycodone, and then they get hooked on that. And then what do you do? Well, we've got to stop these people getting these pills. So they shut down the pill mills, they cut back on them, and people are still hooked. So what do? They buy heroin. But the heroin was available. So it's a revenue stream. It's a revenue stream. And it destroys communities, it destroys families, it destroys villages, it destroys rural areas, and it is making a few people at the top very, very wealthy. And law enforcement goes after the low-level or the mid-level dealers. It never reaches the people at the very top. Not the people in Mexico. Yes, they've arrested a few kingpins in Mexico. But where are the kingpins in the United States? Where are the people who are actually importing the drugs? Where are the people, the Americans in Afghanistan or the various other countries who are in Afghanistan who are actually involved at the very highest levels? We don't see them being going after. They're not getting touched. They're above the law. Like Bill and Hillary Clinton. They're above the law. And we'll see whether Trump actually goes after Bill and Hillary Clinton. Remember, it's not Trump. It's the Justice Department. Trump will be the president, but he can't personally go after people. As much as some people like to think that he's going to be a dictator, I don't think he has any intention of being a dictator. He will use Twitter. He will tweet people, and that will be a very powerful tool. And the intention apparently is to continue doing that. That's how he communicates with the American people. That's how he throws his weight around, but in a way it would be like a press conference. The same thing. But it's a press conference that's directly to the American people. It's a digital press conference that goes directly to the American people instead of going through a press corps, which allows people to respond directly to him. And so he can gauge how people are thinking. Are people going along with this? Or are they not? So it's going to be very, very interesting if he indeed does become president. But I don't think that there's any way that America will go along and radically change as a result of a Trump presidency. Certainly the people on the left and the people on the right will be holding Trump's feet to the fire. This is the term that I've heard the most. I think Alex Jones might have come up with this, holding his feet to the fire, but I've heard other people use this very same term. And a lot of the people who voted for Trump have the exact same attitude. They said, we have no particular loyalty to Trump. If he comes through the way we want him to, if he does bring prosperity to the American worker, if he does improve the reputation and the standing of the United States in the world, if he does cut back on the wars, on the killing, on the deaths that are caused around the world by the American government, by the U.S. military, we will re-elect him. We'll like him. We will give him a thumbs up. But if we don't, if he doesn't come through, then we're going to jettison him and we'll look for someone else. And I personally think Tulsi Gabbard would be a wonderful replacement. She's a Democrat, but she makes a lot of Democrats very uncomfortable because she doesn't toe the Democratic line. In fact, she was a very high level person in the Democratic National Convention during the campaign, but she quit because she didn't like what the Democrats were doing, cheating her man, Bernie Sanders, out of the nomination. She was a Bernie supporter. So this makes her maybe a bit more of a traditional Democrat than Hillary Clinton was. Hillary Clinton is not a traditional Democrat. She was very right-wing for a Democrat, in my opinion. And it's so thankful that I'm so thankful I can talk about her in the past tense. I don't think she's going to be participating in politics much anymore. I think she's done. The next time we hear about Hillary Clinton may be in terms of an indictment, I'm hoping. We'll see. Again, she may be, like so many other people at that very high level, above the law. We have to remember that the server, the private server that she used while she was Secretary of State, is absolutely against the law to do that, and especially because almost everything was top secret. That's because the U.S. government puts top secret on a lot of what it does, just as a matter of routine. And supposedly, a lot of the emails and the messages and the information was above the level of top secret. So every time she sent these emails out, this is a felony. And a felony is a very serious matter in American law. A felony can send you to prison for years. And we're talking about thousands of felonies that Hillary Clinton just absolutely is guilty of, and yet there's no indictment. And other people have gone to prison for far less in terms of improper messaging with top-level, top-secret stuff. Governmental employees. You just don't do that. There are so many laws in this country for so many things, so many regulations. Most Americans, there's probably no Americans, including members of Congress, even the president, who don't know. They don't know everything that's in American law. Because more and more, a lot of American laws are being passed in secret. Well, the law itself may be not secret, but there are hidden riders that are ignored or not even noticed that are in that particular law. And I'll give you an example. There was a law passed in Ohio just recently in which this was about pet land. And this law makes it more difficult for communities to write a regulation that prevents pet land from putting a store in their town. Okay? So the pet land people, which is an Ohio company, they kind of like this law. They like this. And the reason why villages and towns might want to prevent pet land from coming in is because they're worried about using puppy mills. And the puppy mills apparently are in, the Amish do a lot of these puppy mills. And they don't, a lot of people are worried and don't like the way that the puppies are treated. And it's like a factory, you know, a puppy mill. That's the idea. You know, a puppy factory that they just have these purebred dogs and they just keep them pregnant, keep them having puppies. And it's a money-making operation for the Amish and other people in or around central Ohio in this area, supposedly. Okay, so that's one thing. But in that same bill is a rider that is actually about the 5G network. Now, the 5G network is the latest technology having to do with internet speed. You had the 3G, the 4G, and now we're up to the 5G. The 5G would be the next step in bandwidth usage and the speed at which the internet operates. And for this network to work, you need a network of antennae, like a cell phone tower, that is all over and blankets the countryside and the towns. I guess about a quarter-mile apart. Right now, our cell phone towers are much further apart than that. They're really tall, and they provide service coverage, but you don't get the level of the radioactivity because the cell phone tower is so far away from you. But on these new antenna, these things would be small and frequent, and even to the point where they would be on a lamppost. The FCC, which has been completely taken over by corporate interests, has approved this very dangerous new technology. And it's dangerous because it's irradiating. It's microwaves, and for young people and for particularly children, infants, and even unborn babies, it is dangerous. It causes cancer, it causes brain issues, mutations in unborn children. You know, the fetus gets irradiated, and then you have these horrific birth defects. And so this puppy mill, pet land bill, which is good for pet land, is also good for the 5G network, because what it says is local communities will not be able to stop the 5G network from coming into their communities. They won't be able to pass a law that says, oh, you can't put these in our community because of safety reasons, medical reasons, safety concerns. And so there is a law, or there's a policy in Ohio that says if you have a bill, that everything in that bill has to be related. And people were asking, well, how is pet land at all related to the 5G network? And the only relationship that I could see was both bills prevent local communities from this particular corporation, whether it be 5G or pet land, from entering that village or community or town. That's the only way that I saw that these were all similar. But in terms of the subject matter, there's not similar at all. They're not similar. So there might be a way, according to this article I read, for this to be contested. And most Americans, they don't even know about this 5G that's coming in. And hopefully it won't come in. Hopefully people will stop it. Because that's the last thing we need is more poison, more toxic microwaves to deal with for our brains. Our bodies have not evolved to handle large amounts of radioactivity. We are already being bombarded by radioactivity from many, many directions at once. We already, the Wi-Fi itself has radioactivity. The radio waves, the microwaves from various subjects, television sets, everything electronic has a certain level of radiation. That's just how they operate. Even your smoke detectors, your alarm clocks that have a certain amount of radiation. So we're all being affected by this, and it's a wonder that more Americans aren't sick than actually are. But the reality is, of course, is that, in fact, Americans really are getting sick more and more and more. It used to be that Americans would die from heart attacks. Heart attack was number one. Now it's turning more to cancer. There's tumors, various cancers, and the childhood cancer, very bad. It's getting worse. The birth defects in places that have seen war. This is one of the most awful effects of war, is the radioactivity. People don't think of war as producing radioactivity, but it does, because it's in the ammo, the ordnance, 50 caliber and above, and I've talked about this before. You have the depleted uranium that's being spread around the world by military activity. So the United States and its allies go and they attack Syria, they attack Libya, they attack Bosnia. That's when it started, was in the 90s with the depleted uranium. They attack Afghanistan. They blow up a bunch of stuff using bombs that have got uranium, depleted uranium in it, and then they spread uranium around. And this is a crime against humanity, because the uranium is blown around by the dust. People inhale it. A piece gets lodged, and it just sits there and radiates them. Gets lodged in their lungs, maybe. And even American soldiers coming back from Iraq, from the various war zones that the United States is involved in around the world, they come back polluted. They pollute their children, they pollute their wife, and their children are sometimes born with these horrific birth defects. And so this is dangerous not only for our so-called enemies, but also for American soldiers themselves. So there is no upside to using this kind of ordinance. I mean, we shouldn't be going around blowing people up and using hellfire missiles on civilians and wedding parties and funerals and double tapping people, civilians in towns and villages around Iraq and Afghanistan. Anyway, we shouldn't be doing that. And this whole idea that the Russians are involved, I mean, that we should put special forces right up against Russia, that we should bring enormous weaponry to get ready to have a war with Russia. What is the point of that? There's no point in that. The only people who benefit are the people who are the investors in the weapons industry, enormous amount of money to be made there. And that's Lindsey Graham and John McCain. These people are representatives of the weapons industry, the military-industrial complex. That's why they want war with Russia. There's other reasons too, but that's one of the main ones. It's like, keep that fear up, folks. Keep the fear level up of the American people so they won't start thinking, hey, what do we need this enormous federal government for? We have peace. That's the last thing they want. That's all for today. Have a great weekend and sleep well.